Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us today. If you're not familiar with us, Taboola is the world's largest discovery platform. Over 20,000 companies use us to reach over 1.4 billion people every month. We're here to talk about moments of next, specifically cognitive load. We're really excited to have you all. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. As we're talking, on the right-hand side of the screen in the GoToWebinar control panel, there's a questions module. Feel free to ask us any questions throughout the webinar, and when we're finished at the end, we're going to try to answer as many questions as we can. If you'd like to tweet us, you can use the hashtag Taboola Insights, and we'll try to respond as soon as we can. Joining us today, and I'm very excited about this, is Dr. Michal Gruberger, applied neuroscience researcher, and myself, Rachel Zalta. Let me turn it over to Michal to get it started.
Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you very much, Rachel, for having me. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, and I've been focusing on consumer neuroscience for the last decade and a half. My specialty is brain imaging and using brain imaging to study brand communication.
Awesome. And my name is Rachel Zalta. I'm Taboola's Global Research and Insights Lead. My background is in psychology. I've taken a few courses in neuropsychology too, so it's really fun to work with Michal on this kind of stuff. I've been at Taboola for almost 5 years, and what I do for Taboola is I study online behavior based on the billions and billions of data points that we gather on a daily basis. If you'd like, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or on Twitter. So let's get started. So recently, the IAB released a really great paper on coronavirus ad spend impact. And one of the conclusions that they had was this: so that channels with greater flexibility and agility in creating, editing, and optimizing creative will experience less of an impact. And it's something that we see in our network as well. We see clients that are testing all the time, especially now, and those are the clients that, in the end of the day, are going to succeed. We actually have many webinars and a lot of cool blog posts and collateral on creative. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out. Today, we're actually not focusing on creative. We're going to focus on something a little bit different. So, all CMOs and really anyone in the advertising community would agree that if they want to distribute a brand message, the important things to think about are the creative, which we just spoke about, and of course, reaching the right audience with that creative. But there is a third factor there that's really important, and that's really what we're going to talk about today. And that third factor is the reason why brands are willing to pay over $5 million to appear in the Super Bowl, right? Because theoretically, if we think about it, a brand could reach the same exact audience with, in a much more efficient way, right? With much less money, less cost, if they advertise somewhere else. So why in the Super Bowl? And the same question is brought up here. Certain brands don't want to appear next to other types of digital assets or digital players. But theoretically, again, if you're reaching the same person with the same message, what does that matter? And then another thing that we're seeing is that different technology companies are looking to not only target the right audience, but to target the right audience in a specific mindset or motivation. And so that third factor, in addition to the creative and the audience, is the mindset. So we don't only want to reach the right person with the right message, but we want to reach the right person with the right message when the person is in that right mindset. Now, mindset is something that has been studied a lot in the research community. So if you write on Google Scholar advertising mindset, you'll find a lot of results. It's something that the advertising community has also been speaking about in recent years. So Google talks about micro moments, and they talk about the difference between, again, showing the same person, the same creative, but in a I want to know moment or in a I want to buy moment. Of course, it's going to affect them differently depending on the mindset. Facebook talks about this too. So they talk about the difference between seeing the same exact creative when they're drinking their morning cup of coffee or when they're on their commute to work, which right now is not really happening. But or seeing the same exact creative in your on your birthday or any other day. So everybody understands that there are different moments and different mindsets, and we kind of need to look at them differently. In Taboola, we've been doing a lot of research around moments, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I like to intro this research by an example of parallel parking. So I am not the world's best parallel parker. And one thing that happens to me when I try to parallel park unsuccessfully is that I tell everybody in the car they have to be quiet and I turn down the radio. And that kind of helps me parallel park. And I actually Googled this. It's not only me. So there are other people that do this too. And some people even claim that they can see better when they turn down the radio. Now, of course, they can't actually see better, but it does help them complete the task. And so this kind of brings me to the talking about cognitive load, and I'll kind of let Michal take it from here since she's the neuroscience expert here.
So since this is confession time, you're not alone, Rachel. I do that too, actually. I can't parallel park when music is loud. And there's a reason and a name for it in neuroscience. We do call it cognitive load. And what we know during cognitive load is that brain capacity is actually limited for processing anything else. So it's not by chance that you're lowering down the music. We know that the brain itself is also taking measures to minimize incoming information when you're trying to focus on something. Now, in order to understand that, you need to know a little bit about the brain. So the brain is about the size of a grapefruit. It's actually very small. It's about 2% of our body weight. But merely any type of activity that you want to perform or any action that you want to take, the brain orchestrates. So it's the body's number one player, and it has a lot of significance. And in correlation with that, it's a real energy drainer. So it's not by chance that after working a lot you feel drained. The brain is actually consuming 20% of our body's energy. And so when we're performing a task and we're wasting all that energy, the body takes measures to avoid energy waste, and it takes measures to make sure that the task is well performed, as this is really a very, very expensive process that's taking place. You want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, I got it. Sorry. Yeah, so Michal, I added this here because I saw this on on the news and I wanted to ask you what you think about this. Can you actually lose weight just by thinking?
So it's a painful question now during lockdown days, how to lose weight. But yes, it wouldn't bother trying to invest a lot of cognitive resources in something. Why not? Try adding exercises though if you really want to lose weight. But yes, cognitive load is the critical process. And actually, it's one of the only processes in our body that has its own bodyguard. So the body has actually, or evolution has actually developed a whole cover-up process for cognitive load to make sure that when we're attending something, this process will end up successfully. And this bodyguard is called attentional filtering. What this means is that when we are busy reading something or doing something or performing a task, our brain puts on this filter, which makes sure that we won't be interfered and the task will be performed successfully. So we won't run through all of this due to lack of time, but actually I'm sure many of you are familiar with this video. If you're not, you can find it on YouTube by searching excuse me, inattentional blindness. But what this video is about in this experiment, people are asked to count the throwing of the ball between players with black shirts and white shirts. And when you run this video in a crowd, people will normally come up with an answer. There were 15 or 20 throwings between the two groups of black shirts and white shirts. And then you ask them, have you noticed anything irregular in the scene? They will typically say no. But when you show them the video again, what people see is that during the time of the game, when they were counting the ball being thrown, there was a big actor dressed up as a gorilla walking across the room, kind of banging on their chest. A very odd stimulus right in front of them, which they didn't notice. And this is a typical example of inattentional blindness or attentional filtering. While people are busy counting the ball throws, they simply don't notice the new types of information that are presented to them.
Yeah, this is probably one of my favorite experiments. And I guess it kind of explains, right? It explains why I need to turn down that radio when I'm parallel parking. It's because I need to focus on something specific.
You focus, and you got a habit of doing that. If your friends don't shut up when you tell them to, I can bet that you won't be able to repeat what they said because you're busy parking. So
Right.
you're trying to minimize incoming information, and if you can't control it, then the brain will do the rest for you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually out of a recently published paper in Neuron, trying to reveal a little bit more about this process of attentional filtering. And what this study showed is that although the brain does sometimes process some of the incoming information, people are not aware of it. And we will see more of that later. So if you're busy now on looking at the parking, your auditory processing will be shut down. So yes, we have a very strong mechanism trying to make sure that we're actually attending only what we're supposed to attend. Yeah, I like to call it, before we go to the pupil dilation, I like to call it a mechanism for return of investment. So if I'm reading, if I want to go on YouTube and I want to watch something now, and it sounds funny, but it's actually, I'm consuming a lot of energy, that the body wants to make sure that there's a good return of investment, and they don't want any interferences coming in. So how do we know about cognitive load? Can I ask you, the listeners, to give me a number for your cognitive load or your cognitive processes at this point? Obviously, you can't, even if I asked you to rate it from 1 to 10, you can throw a number, but you can't really quantify it. And actually, when I'm asking you to reflect back on your cognitive load, I'm disturbing your cognitive load, because I'm asking you to monitor it while listening to me. So it's very tricky to measure cognitive load, but obviously it's critical for us to know if viewers are processing or if listeners are processing what we're presenting to them. So fortunately, we have a very good physiological correlate of cognitive load, and that is pupil dilation. When cognitive load grows higher and people are more attentive, pupil dilation grows bigger, and that can be easily measured. So I hope that all of you now have very large pupils while listening to Rachel and to me. And
I love that.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I think it's funny. Go ahead.
So if you go on the next slide, this is just an example showing how research has been using this very simple fact for long ago, actually. So in this study taken from biological psychology from 2015, participants were shown different kind of very simple stimuli like this. I don't know if you can see my cursor. I suppose you can't, but this square, this blue square on the left. And the only thing that changed was how complex the demand was. Sometimes they were instructed to just say the color. In other cases, they were instructed to say the color and shape, or the color and shape and sound, which they also heard. And what you see on the central panel is that the more complex the instruction, the wider the pupil dilation. Which is a typical illustration of the fact that pupil dilation actually reflects cognitive load.
Yeah, so I think this is fascinating, right? There's like something that happens in our eye that we can't control that kind of could tell if we're focusing on something or we're more like open. And technology companies are taking advantage of this too. So
I'll just say one more comment about that. It's actually quite intuitive if you think about it, that pupil dilation is a sign of arousal. So when we're more engaged in something or more invested in it, then we're a bit more aroused physiologically, and that comes and that is manifested in the pupil dilation. It's simply a physiological reaction to us being engaged in something.
right. Yeah, I think it's awesome. And so I think one of the things, and Michal was also helping with kind of choosing these examples too, is that technology companies today are taking advantage of that, right? The fact that we can actually monitor this cognitive load. So there's a company called Harman, which is a Samsung company, and what they're doing is they are putting cameras inside of cars in order to measure the pupil dilation of the driver to see if the driver is concentrated or not, and if they're focused on the driving, which I think is awesome. And then there's another company, and this kind of relates to what you were saying, Michal, a lie detection company. Since we can't control it, like you said, it's a physiological reaction. There are companies that are measuring the cognitive load while people are talking, and based on that and other physiological measures are able to tell if the person is lying or not. Because, as you can probably imagine, when we tell a lie, our cognitive load kind of goes up because we're constantly, making sure that we're not going to be caught, and we're thinking if our story makes sense, etc. So
we're aroused. We're physiologically aroused.
And you're aroused. So I think that's really interesting, and it's just cool that these companies are actually, they're looking at the science and they're taking advantage of it, and they're kind of doing something good out of it. So I think that's really cool. So what we did when working on this stuff, also with Michal and also with other research companies, is we tried to map out the cognitive load, and we looked at two different types of mindsets that we have during the day. One of them is what we're calling a moment of intent. That's a moment of high cognitive load. When we're very focused on something, that's when I'm parallel parking, or if you're writing an important email or something like that. And then on the other hand, we have moments of next, which are moments of lower cognitive load. And we can actually move from we do move from high cognitive load, from moments of next to moments of intent, hundreds of times during our day. So we write an email, and then we take a little bit of a break, and we go on our phone a little bit, and then we do something else, and then we're constantly we're starting a task and ending that task, and starting that task and ending that task. And that's kind of how. Yeah.
Rachel, they call it a rhythm. It's like a dance of the mind, going from intent to the moment of next, back to intent, and then to the moment of next.
Yeah, totally. And then what we try to do is kind of take that to the world of advertising. And I think this is where it gets really interesting. So if we try to think of these different moments and think about, what happens when a brand is trying to reach us during these specific moments, if we're in a moment of intent, so we're trying to parallel park, and a brand's reaching us here, there are 3 different reactions that we mapped out. The first is an interruptive reaction, which I think is the most intuitive, right? Like, so I'm trying to parallel park, and imagine that a brand jumps behind my car and says, you can't parallel park until you listen to my brand message for 6 seconds. So like, obviously that would be a very interruptive experience. And I gathered a few studies from that end that talk about how pre-roll ads increase when people see a lot of pre-roll ads. They have a higher chance to install ad blockers because of that negative experience. And there are studies that show that people aren't willing to revisit or reshare a page with a pop-up ad, which is another type of interruptive ad.
Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead, Michal.
We have our emotional brain system or network is actually an approach avoidance mechanism. So when we don't like something, or when something intrudes or interferes, there is an avoidance mechanism which takes place. It's a whole cascade of behavioral and emotional reactions that are all targeted at avoiding the intrusion.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then obviously, like, we're annoyed and like we feel negatively about that brand or even about that that page sometimes.
What we feel, the strong motivation to avoid the interfering content is actually the avoidance network becoming active. So we can really, in neuroscience, we can actually map the neurological reaction to such an interference. It's a very strong.
That's really cool. Wow. Okay. So another example or something else that could happen is if I'm trying to parallel park and someone isn't interruptive, so they're not jumping behind me with a brand message, but instead they're standing beside me and they're offering me a delicious sandwich. Okay, so in that case, I'm trying to parallel park. I'm very focused right now, and if there's a sandwich, then I'm probably just going to ignore it. And I might not have that negative reaction that I have for an interruptive experience, but here I just won't look at it. So there are actually many studies here. This is just one example of an eye tracking study where, if you're focused on finding content, you're probably going to ignore banner ads because you're not here to consume, to buy something. You're not here to look at ads. You're here to read the news and find out what's going on, which I think is also probably especially true today.
Yeah, the heat maps that Rachel was showing are eye tracking heat maps, which is another technology that we use to quantify people's attentional processes. And going back to the gorilla experiment, there's this interesting study I wanted to share with you, differentiating between two types of people who were not noticing the gorilla. So one type were those people on the left who were, it does seem like there was some visual attention towards the gorilla, but you can clearly see that most of the visual attention was towards the players with the ball. And so there was some peripheral attention towards the gorilla, but very little, which explains why people didn't report noticing it. On the other hand, however, we do have people who are clearly fixating on the gorilla and still not reporting it and not seeing it, which means that Rachel and I discussed it as the bodyguard standing inside the eye or outside of the eye. So either people are not looking and that's why they're not seeing, or they're looking but the brain shut down the information, they're still not seeing. The outcome in both cases is the same, that people are simply not aware of the interruption in the scene.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting, right? When you hear about this gorilla experiment, you're asking yourself exactly that. Like, are people actually not seeing it, or is their brain not processing it? So it's really cool that they ran this experiment and they kind of eye tracked it and found this result. So I love this.
So I think this has, we've discussed here 3 levels of selective attention or attentional filtering. One is your behavioral shutting down the music while you were parking. The other is not seeing or not noticing, and the third is actually not looking. So in all three, the outcome is the same, but this shows how resistant we are to incoming information when cognitive load is high.
Cool. Yeah, I love this. Okay, so back to the example. We're in a moment of intent. I'm parallel parking and a brand is trying to reach me. Sometimes in certain cases, it can be helpful. So when can it be helpful? So it's helpful if I'm trying to parallel park and a brand in that moment that helps people parallel park kind of comes in and offers their services, right? That would be like extremely helpful. And that's kind of, what Google's doing. And that's what their micro moments are about. It's about reaching people in the exact moment that they're looking for something, right? And so that's one of the reasons why Google is so successful, right? Because we're searching for something because we need help right now, and then Google kind of gives us help at that moment. So we spoke about moments of intent and what could happen to us, or what kind of experiences we can have if a brand is trying to reach us in moments of intent. What happens when we're in a moment of next? So you see how happy I look, or that's not me, but how happy the person here looks when they finish parallel parking. And let's say, I'm waiting for a friend now. I have like 5 minutes to kill. Usually this is how we define the moment of next. So we finish a task and now we're interested in finding a new one. And usually during this moment, what I would do is I would take out my phone and I would start scrolling down social media, right? So that's like one example that I might do. And we actually experience these moments of next all the time. So they're like, another example would be, and this is actually my favorite example for moments of next. Like, let's say I'm home and I watch a movie and I finish the movie and I'm not tired. I don't want to go to sleep yet. So I walk into the kitchen and I open the fridge and I kind of just peer inside, right? I'm just like looking. I'm not hungry. I'm just like, is there anything interesting that the fridge can offer me today? So that's a type of moment of next too, right? It's like we finished our task and we're looking for that next task. And another moment of next is what we found, which is on publisher sites when we finished reading an article and we're kind of looking for that next article to engage with. And that's one of the reasons, sorry, 1 second. We ran a study with Nielsen and we measured that cognitive load that Michal was talking about. And what we found was, similar to that example that I just brought, at the bottom of the article, our cognitive load was the lowest, as opposed to anywhere else on the publisher's site, which makes sense, right? Because if we're anywhere else on the publisher's site, we'd have to be concentrating because we're reading an article. At the bottom of the article, we finished reading and now we're kind of searching for that next thing. And that's a moment where we'll usually want to explore. We'll want to, skim through a feed. We'll want to look at all the options that we have and then choose something that is interesting to us. So that's one of the reasons why Taboola put their feed specifically under the article. And when we ran this study with Nielsen and Brainster, another research company, we found some really cool things. So the first thing that we found was, as opposed to an interruptive moment of intent, which in this case was a pre-roll ad, where someone was, the blue dot is their eye tracker, and they clicked on a different video, and instead of being able to see that video, they were forced to engage with this ad. What happens is that they're not really willing to look at it. So I hope you guys can see it well, but the light blue dot is not really looking at the ad at all. As opposed to that, in the moment of next, in the bottom of the article, where people don't feel forced, they could leave whenever they want, people were willing to actually engage with that ad. So Nielsen measured a 25% increase in visual attention in the moment of next, as opposed to interruptive moments of intent.
That's cool.
Yeah, isn't that awesome? It's really cool when like you connect science with advertising and then you see these results, and it kind of explains how us as consumers, like why we feel different things. So
I'm a big fan of what we call ecological validity. So I love it when you show a natural stimuli and people can respond to it naturally. I think that it's very robust in its outcome. as opposed to lab stimulus, which are often, not so similar to everyday life.
Right. Yeah. Totally. So another thing that we found with this study with Nielsen was that in the moment of next, when we showed people again the same exact stimuli, the same exact ad, people experienced a 23% stronger emotional reaction when they saw the same exact video in a moment of next. So a 23% stronger emotional impact is huge. What it means is basically something like, you'd remember many more details about this ad if you had such a strong emotional impact. You might see this ad and then later the next day tell your friend about it, right? So 23% is really, really huge. And then the last thing that we saw was this with a company that's called Brainster. And here again, we showed people the same exact stimuli, the same exact ads. And what we found was that people rated the same ads 2.4 times more favorable when they appeared in the moment of next, as opposed to an interruptive moment of intent. Now, a 2.4 times more favorable experience of an ad is huge. Okay, so this is like you would go and search for that ad again because you found it so fun and enjoyable. And this is
yeah.
Right, and again, this has nothing to do with the creative. Here we show people the same exact creatives, but just in different like mindsets. So this is really very cool.
These are all fantastic manifestations of the degree of engagement in the ad. It's exactly the same ad, but the mindset actually determines different engagement levels. And when people are more engaged, obviously they'll be more emotionally responsive, and they will, if they like the ad, they will like it much more.
Yep.
So just on a bit more of a philosophical level, there's this really interesting paper which came out a few years ago called "Should I Stay or Should I Go?" And it's a real comprehensive review about what you said, that we do naturally hundreds of times a day, our fluctuation between exploration and exploitation, they call it. So actually, timing is everything, and this is what the authors are pointing out. And they say that while a person is in exploitation mode, they don't want to be disturbed and they don't want to be introduced with new information. When a person is at exploration mode, the brain is actually happy when they find something. So when we're looking for something or when we're open to incoming information, it's actually a gratifying experience to find the next thing to exploit. So if you want to check this further, this could be an interesting reading. It's a nice overview of the topic.
Yeah, I like this. Okay, cool. So, when we think about marketers taking this information and kind of applying it to their marketing campaigns, what we recommend based on this is two things. Number one is making sure to have your ads placed in moments of intent to help consumers complete the task that they are, they're doing right now. But another thing that's extremely crucial is placing ads in moments of next, in moments where your consumers are actually looking for that next task, and making sure that that next task, is reading a little bit about your brand or about your service. So that's kind of how we sum it up. And
I like to sorry for interrupting. I like to use the analogy of pushing a child on a swing. So it's all a matter of when you push the swing. If you push it at the wrong timing, you're actually interfering with the swinging. Whereas if the ad appears on the right moment in the right direction, then it actually pushes the child further on the swing. So it's all a matter of adapting the ad to the timing and the mindset of the viewer.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy, actually. I like the swing analogy. Yeah, so we've reached the end of our webinar. So just a few takeaways, make sure to definitely create a powerful creative, and you can check out all of our materials from that, regarding that. And of course, you want to reach the right audience, right? If we reach the wrong audience, it's not going to make an impact. But the third and the takeaway from this webinar is to consider their mindset and to think, are they in a moment of next? Are they in a moment of intent? Am I reaching them in an interruptive way? Or am I reaching them when they're searching for that next thing? And then it'll have a stronger impact.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So just to give you guys a little context, you might be familiar with this, but this webinar is part of a series of webinars. And we're going to be talking about the next webinar that we have is also going to be about this moment of next, but different studies that we ran after this Nielsen and Brainstorm study. It's going to be on June 18th. It's about when, where, and how people experience moments of next. So feel free to join us there. And if you'd like to sign up to that webinar or check out the webinars that we've ran in the past, feel free to visit explore.taboola.com/taboola-insights-webinars. So I hope you enjoyed this webinar. And now it's time for questions. So we're getting a bunch of questions here, Michal. Before we go ahead and read them, I just want to say that this webinar, the deck and the recording are going to be sent to anyone that signed up for the webinar, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so let me just, I'm going to read some of these questions. Okay, Michal, it looks like this one's for you, and I actually really like this question. So are we experiencing more or less moments of next during the current pandemic? Yeah, so good.
Wow, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I think it could go both ways, but it's important to understand how. So on one level, I think people are much more internally guided when they're looking for the next information in their moment of next, because we're all a little bit stressed and curious for updates and for more facts. So while we're looking for the next upcoming stuff, we might be a little bit less open to anything and a little bit more oriented towards COVID-19 information. So that's one intuition I have. It's like we're primed to give more, for COVID-19 information to be more salient. But on the other hand, I believe we all have much more free time, which means that we are exploring much more. So altogether, I think that we have more time to be more moments of next over the day, simply because we consume more media.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it kind of makes sense. Like if I look at my life, like I could see more moments of next because maybe I have a little bit more time on my hands. I'm not traveling, right? I'm not really going out. But on the other hand, yeah, you're right. Like when I'm online, I'm very I'm focused on, trying to read something specific. So here's another question that actually relates to that. So are interruptive experiences even more interruptive now during stressful times?
The answer would be yes, because we're all a bit stressed. I think we all have less patience. So I think that the ultimate exploration or the ultimate moment of next would be when you're lying down on the beach on your vacation and you really nothing bothers you. So if you are think about now in reference to that, you realize that yes, we're all a little bit more uptight. And so my intuition would be yes, we're a little bit less tolerant and we're a bit more annoyed, and any interruption would be more interrupting now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. So I see a bunch more questions. I think we're only going to have time for a couple more. So if the creative is really good, does it matter if it's interruptive or not?
That's an interesting question. I'm happy for it, actually. Look, It's true that that we use attentional filtering, and we're not even choosing to do it. We're doing it, like I said, as a return of investment mechanism or a bodyguard to make sure that the exploitation or the cognitive load process is actually well performed. However, there are always a crack in that filter, because the brain does want to know, or we do want to become aware if some very acute, significant information comes in with survival implications, or with very high self-relevance. For example, many people maybe, I assume, are familiar with the cocktail party effect, uh, which says that when you're in a party, you'll be, chatting with your friends and not noticing what other people are talking about unless someone says Rachel Zalta, and then you'll suddenly notice them because it's very self-relevant and very salient to you. So yes, if something exploded, God forbid, out of our window, or if there would be any other very salient stimulus, we would notice it in spite of the attentional filtering. So very successful creative can actually come across the filter. However, of course, when the filter is there and it's that strong, then the challenge is much, much higher, and the threshold is much higher.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I like that example, by the way, of the cocktail party effect and someone calling me at a party. One day we'll go back to parties.
Yeah.
So we'll take one more question. Are there any other places that I can read about the moment of next? So yes, whoever would like to read more about the moment of next, actually, you can actually just Google moment of next, and there were a bunch of articles in a lot of different places actually that were published about different studies that we ran and different studies around the moment of next. If you'd like, we have a bunch of blog posts also, so you could go on Tabula's blog and you could search for Moments of Next there, and you can find some really awesome materials there. So we don't actually have any more time for any more questions, but if you'd like to reach out to me or Michal on LinkedIn, feel free to do so. We're looking forward to getting to know you guys. So I think that's it for today. This was really great. Michal, thank you so much for joining. Thank you everybody else for listening.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah, that was great. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you everyone for listening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.